204th birthday Carbon and Biodiversity from here in Scotland. I'm Simon Milne, the Director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and our gardens share a long and productive history, and I look forward to us continuing to work together on plant science and conservation to the benefit of our natural world and indeed society. Selamat ulang tahun.
Selamat siang. Greetings from the USA on the 204th anniversary of the Boger Botanic Gardens. My name is Stephen Maciewski. I am Vice President of the American Begonia Society and co-chair of the Conservation Committees for ABS and the Gesneriad Society. I had the pleasure of visiting the Boger Botanical Gardens while attending the 9th International Flora Malaysian Symposium in 2013. I met many people and still keep in touch with them, including Vishnu Ardi and Dol Rahman. I spent hours in your lovely garden. I will always remember the handkerchief tree, the red jade vine, the pig canary tree, the Copsia arborea, the bamboo groves, and the old cemetery. Looking forward to visiting with you again and working on conservation and educational projects. Sampa Jimpa.
Halo, saya Axel Delbert Poulsen. Saya seorang peneliti jahe liar di Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. Saya rindu jalan-jalan di Kebun Raya Bogor, menikmati koleksi tumbuhan. Saya juga rindu kerja lapangan dan menulis ilmiah bersama. Mari kita percepat pengetahuan tentang flora Indonesia sebelum hilang. Selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor ke-204.
Hello, Carbon and Biodiversity. You're not just a beautiful garden, you're also a garden with a great conservation impact and a great scientific impact. It's been a great pleasure working with you over the past decade, and I look forward to working with you over many years to come. So, Selamat ulang tahun.
Good.
Hello to all our friends at Bogle Botanic Gardens from all your friends at the Royal Botanic Gardens queue. Congratulations on your 204th anniversary, and we wish you all the best for your celebratory webinar. You have a beautiful botanic garden, you are highly valued partners, and long may our partnership continue. Happy anniversary.
Happy birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor. More than 20 years ago, I visited you for the first time for my PhD project on orchids. Many students followed, such as Abhishkar Subedi from Nepal, and more recently, your own Richa Kusumawati. I hope we can continue our collaboration for many more years to come.
Saya Rasio Ridosani, Direktur Jenderal Perdagangan Hukum, Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan. Selamat ulang tahun ke-204 kepada Kebun Raya Bogor. Teruslah bekerja, berkarya, dan berkontribusi dalam mengkonservasi dan menyelamatkan kekayaan keanekaragaman hayati bangsa Indonesia. Kebun Raya Bogor, kebanggaan bangsa Indonesia.
Halo, perkenalkan nama saya Abinawanto. Saya selaku Ketua Program Studi Pasca Sarjana Biologi Departemen Biologi FMIPA UI. Pada kesempatan ini saya mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun kepada Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga Kebun Raya Bogor menjadi salah satu kebun raya terbaik di Asia, bahkan menjadi kebun raya terbaik di dunia. Dan semoga Kebun Raya Bogor selalu jaya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami di FMIPA UM, seluruh sivitas akademika berkomitmen terhadap pelestarian tumbuhan tropika melalui pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian masyarakat. Saya Profesor Dr. Hadiswono MSI, Dekan Fakultas MIPA Universitas Negeri Malang, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga menjadi yang terbaik dalam penelitian dan pelestarian tumbuhan tropika. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Diana Kusumastuti, Direktur Jenderal Cipta Karya, beserta keluarga besar Direktorat Jenderal Cipta Karya, Kementerian Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun yang ke-204 untuk Kebun Raya Bogor yang menjadi pionir kebun raya di Indonesia. Semoga semakin baik pelayanannya dan semakin bermanfaat bagi nusa, bangsa, dan negara. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, a very happy 204th birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor, from here in Scotland. I'm Simon Milne, the Director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and our gardens share a long and productive history, and I look forward to us continuing to work together on plant science and conservation to the benefit of our natural world and indeed society. Selamat ulang tahun.
Selamat siang. Greetings from the USA on the 204th anniversary of the Bogor Botanic Gardens. My name is Stephen Machiavski. I am Vice President of the American Begonia Society and co-chair of the Conservation Committees for ABS and the Gisnariad Society. I had the pleasure of visiting the Bogor Botanical Gardens while attending the 9th International Flora Malaysian Symposium in 2013. I met many people and still keep in touch with them, including Vishnu Ardi and Dol Rahman. I spent hours in your lovely garden. I will always remember the handkerchief tree, the red jade vine, the pig canary tree, the Copsia arborea, the bamboo groves, and the old cemetery. Looking forward to visiting with you again and working on conservation and educational projects. Sampa Jimpa.
Halo, saya Axel Dalberg Poulsen. Saya seorang peneliti jahe liar di Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. Saya rindu jalan-jalan di Kebun Raya Bogor, menikmati koleksi tumbuhan. Saya juga rindu kerja lapangan dan menulis ilmiah bersama. Mari kita percepat pengetahuan tentang flora Indonesia sebelum hilang. Selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor ke-204.
Hello, Kebun Raya Bogor. You're not just a beautiful garden, you're also a garden with a great conservation impact and a great scientific impact. It's been a great pleasure working with you over the past decade, and I look forward to working with you over many years to come. So, selamat ulang tahun.
Good.
Hello to all our friends at Bogor Botanic Gardens from all your friends at the Royal Botanic Gardens queue. Congratulations on your 204th anniversary, and we wish you all the best for your celebratory webinar. You have a beautiful botanic garden, you are highly valued partners, and long may our partnership continue. Happy anniversary.
Happy birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor. More than 20 years ago, I visited you for the first time for my PhD project on orchids. Many students followed, such as Abhishek Subedi from Nepal, and more recently, your own Richa Kusumawati. I hope we can continue our collaboration for many more years to come.
Saya Rasio Ridosani, Direktur Jenderal Perdagangan Hukum, Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan. Selamat ulang tahun ke-204 kepada Kebun Raya Bogor. Teruslah bekerja, berkarya, dan berkontribusi dalam mengkonservasi dan menyelamatkan kekayaan keanekaragaman hayati bangsa Indonesia. Kebun Raya Bogor, kebanggaan bangsa Indonesia.
Halo, perkenalkan nama saya Abi Nawanto. Saya selaku Ketua Program Studi Pasca Sarjana Biologi Departemen Biologi FMIPA UI. Pada kesempatan ini saya mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun kepada Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga Kebun Raya Bogor menjadi salah satu kebun raya terbaik di Asia, bahkan menjadi kebun raya terbaik di dunia. Dan semoga Kebun Raya Bogor selalu jaya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami di FMIPA UM seluruh sivitas akademika berkomitmen terhadap pelestarian tumbuhan tropika melalui pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian masyarakat. Saya Profesor Dr. Hadiswono MSI, Dekan Fakultas MIPA Universitas Negeri Malang, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga menjadi yang terbaik dalam penelitian dan pelestarian tumbuhan tropika. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Diana Kusumastuti, Direktur Jenderal Cipta Karya, beserta keluarga besar Direktorat Jenderal Cipta Karya, Kementerian Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun yang ke-204 untuk Kebun Raya Bogor yang menjadi pionir kebun raya di Indonesia. Semoga semakin baik pelayanannya dan semakin bermanfaat bagi nusa, bangsa, dan negara. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, a very happy 204th birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor, from here in Scotland. I'm Simon Milne, the Director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and our gardens share a long and productive history, and I look forward to us continuing to work together on plant science and conservation to the benefit of our natural world and indeed society. Selamat ulang tahun.
Selamat siang. Greetings from the USA on the 204th anniversary of the Bogor Botanic Gardens. My name is Stephen Machievski. I am Vice President of the American Begonia Society and co-chair of the Conservation Committees for ABS and the Gisnariad Society. I had the pleasure of visiting the Bogor Botanical Gardens while attending the 9th International Flora Malaysian Symposium in 2013. I met many people and still keep in touch with them, including Rashid Marty and Dol Rahman. I spent hours in your lovely garden. I will always remember the handkerchief tree, the red jade vine, the pig canary tree, the Copsia arborea, the bamboo groves, and the old cemetery. Looking forward to visiting with you again and working on conservation and educational projects. Sampa Jimpa.
Halo, saya Axel Delbert Poulsen. Saya seorang peneliti jahe liar di Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh. Saya rindu jalan-jalan di Kebun Raya Bogor, menikmati koleksi tumbuhan. Saya juga rindu kerja lapangan dan menulis ilmiah bersama. Mari kita percepat pengetahuan tentang flora Indonesia sebelum hilang. Selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor ke-204.
Hello, Kebun Raya Bogor. You're not just a beautiful garden, you're also a garden with a great conservation impact and a great scientific impact. It's been a great pleasure working with you over the past decade, and I look forward to working with you over many years to come. So, selamat ulang tahun.
Good.
Hello to all our friends at Bogor Botanic Gardens. Your
presentasi yang lain kan mati ya, Mas.
Congratulations on your 204th anniversary, and we wish you all the best for your webinar. You have a beautiful botanic garden, you are highly valued partners, and long may our partnership continue. Happy anniversary.
Happy birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor. More than 20 years ago, I visited you for the first time for my PhD project on orchids. Many students followed, such as Abhishek Subedi from Nepal, and more recently, your own Richa Kusumawati. I hope we can continue our collaboration for many more years to come.
Saya Rasio Ridosani, Direktur Jenderal Perdagangan Hukum, Lingkungan Hidup dan Kehutanan. Selamat ulang tahun ke-204 kepada Kebun Raya Bogor. Teruslah bekerja, berkarya, dan berkontribusi dalam mengkonservasi dan menyelamatkan kekayaan keanekaragaman hayati bangsa Indonesia. Kebun Raya Bogor, kebanggaan bangsa Indonesia.
Halo, perkenalkan nama saya Abi Nawanto. Saya selaku Ketua Program Studi Pasca Sarjana Biologi Departemen Biologi FMIPA UI. Pada kesempatan ini saya mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun kepada Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga Kebun Raya Bogor menjadi salah satu kebun raya terbaik di Asia, bahkan menjadi kebun raya terbaik di dunia. Dan semoga Kebun Raya Bogor selalu jaya.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Kami di FMIPA UM, seluruh sivitas akademika berkomitmen terhadap pelestarian tumbuhan tropika melalui pendidikan, penelitian, dan pengabdian masyarakat. Saya Profesor Dr. Hadiswono MSI, Dekan Fakultas MIPA Universitas Negeri Malang, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun Kebun Raya Bogor yang ke-204. Semoga menjadi yang terbaik dalam penelitian dan pelestarian tumbuhan tropika. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya Diana Kusumastuti, Direktur Jenderal Cipta Karya, beserta keluarga besar Direktorat Jenderal Cipta Karya, Kementerian Pekerjaan Umum dan Perumahan Rakyat, mengucapkan selamat ulang tahun yang ke-204 untuk Kebun Raya Bogor yang menjadi pionir kebun raya di Indonesia. Semoga semakin baik pelayanannya dan semakin bermanfaat bagi nusa, bangsa, dan negara. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Hello, a very happy 204th birthday, Kebun Raya Bogor, from here in Scotland. I'm Simon Milne, the Director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and our gardens share a long and productive history, and I look forward to us continuing to work together on plant science and conservation to the benefit of our natural world and indeed society. Selamat ulang tahun.
Selamat siang. Greetings from the USA on the 204th anniversary of the Bogor Botanic Gardens. My name is Stephen Machievski. I am Vice President of the American Begonia Society and co-chair of the Conservation Committees for ABS and the Gesneriad Society. I had the pleasure of visiting the Bogor Botanical Gardens while attending the 9th International Flora Malaysianan Symposium in 2013.
Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? We will start the webinar now. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. His Excellency, Chairman of National Agency for Research and Innovation, Bapak Dr. Laksana Trihandoko, Master of Science. Honorable Head of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, Bapak Dr. Arhendrian, Master of Science. Honorable speakers, Dr. Paul Smith, Secretary General of Botanic Gardens, Conservation International, United Kingdom. Dr. Therese Cho from Singapore Botanic Garden, Singapore. Ade Aiken, Master of Art, Master of Horticulture from Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, United Kingdom. Dr. Didit Oktapribadi from Bali Botanic Gardens, Indonesia. Distinguished guests, respectable participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. On behalf of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to a 2-day international webinar in commemoration of the 204th anniversary of Bogor Botanic Gardens and the 54th anniversary of Indonesian Institute of Sciences. The Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, held a 2-day international webinar on the 18th and 19th of May, 2021. The first day webinar will focus on central themes of botanic gardens in the pandemic era. The second day webinar will be focusing on conservation on threatened plant species. My name is Eka Marta Dela Rahayu, and I'll be your master of ceremony. This 2 days international webinar in commemoration of the 204th anniversary of Bogor Botanic Gardens and the 54th anniversary of the Indonesian Institute of Sciences is conducted virtually. By this afternoon, a total of 680 registrants coming from 18 countries have been registered, which include Australia, Bolivia, Germany, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Pakistan, Palestine, Peru, the Philippines, Poland, Republic of Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Timor-Leste, United Kingdom, and United States of America. This webinar is also available in our official YouTube channel of LIPI. Ladies and gentlemen, opening today's webinar, now I would like to invite the head of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, to deliver his report. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Dr. Arhendrian, Master of Science.
His Excellency, Chairman of National Today is the 204th anniversary of Bogor Botanic Gardens. As mentioned earlier, this two-day webinar is held in commemoration of the anniversary. Ladies and gentlemen, plant species are encountering threats and extinction all around the world. They should be safe and conserved. But nowadays, it is not only plant species that are threatened. Botanic gardens themselves have to be safe and further strengthened, particularly in this pandemic era. It goes without saying that the pandemic has raised restrictions and problems in many aspects regarding the management of botanic gardens, including financial and the way we operate the botanic gardens. That is why we choose botanic gardens in the pandemic era as the theme for the first day of the webinar. The main objective are to share experiences and get the lesson learned from them. Dr. Paul Smith, the Secretary General of Botanical Garden Conservation International, will talk about improving botanic garden resilience. We also will listen the experiences from Singapore Botanic Gardens, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, and Bali Botanic Gardens. On the second day, we will discuss about the conservation on threatened plant species. Considering serious threat faced by plant species, botanic gardens are undoubtedly the last fortress for plant conservation. Botanic gardens and conservation are two sides of the coin. Conservation is the core spirit of the botanic gardens, and the plant collection are the backbone. These botanic gardens cannot be separate from conservation. And tomorrow, Dr. Geus Barbara from International Union for Conservation of Nature, or IUCN, will share the information about plant on the IUCN Red List. Ladies and gentlemen, talking about botanic gardens, plant collection in botanic gardens are not only group of plants that arrange in an aesthetical way. They are far more than that. Some are still not known yet and need to be identified. Some are still being examined and studied. Some are very old and need special treatment. Some are species with only single species. Some are the holotypes or would be holotypes of certain species. And some other are very important in terms of scientific and conservation values, including those of threatened and strictly endemic species. Therefore, they should be maintained very, very carefully and well managed accordingly. Lastly, on behalf of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, I do hope that existing collaboration between Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens and BGCI, IUCN, Singapore Botanic Gardens, Royal Botanic Gardens Edinburgh, and other World Botanic Gardens can be further strengthened, particularly in the field of research and plant conservation. To end my welcoming remarks, please allow me to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Laksana Trihandoko, the Chairman of National Agency for Research and Innovation, all the speakers, the organizing committee, and all participants. Thank you to all of you, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Bapak Dr. Hendrian. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to the next agenda, opening remarks given by the Chairman of National Agency for Research and Innovation. His Excellency will also mark the opening of this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Dr. Laksana Trihandoko, Master of Science. Ladies and gentlemen, sorry for the delay.
Sudah tadi di kamera sudah udah bisa ini ada sini dipasang video galeri biar kelihatan. Mas.
Selamat siang, Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam. Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good afternoon, everyone. Oke, mau mulai, Pak?
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will move on to the next agenda, opening remarks given by the Chairman of National Agency for Research and Innovation. His Excellency will also mark the opening of this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Bapak Dr. Laksana Trihandoko, Master of Science.
Oke, terima kasih, Mbak Eka. Thank you very much. I wish very good afternoon for everyone. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat siang, salam sejahtera, salam sehat untuk kita semua. Honorable Dr. Hendrian, the Director for Center, oh sorry, I don't remember, Bogor Botanical Gardens, yeah, shortly speaking. And also honorable invited speakers. I think we already have Dr. Paul Smith here, and also Dr. Joe. Yeah, nice to meet you. It is a great honor for me, yeah, as the new chairman of the National Research and Innovation Agency, to join this webinar and deliver opening remark in this webinar. And before moving forward, I would like to introduce briefly about the newly established what we call as the Badan Riset dan Inovasi Nasional, or in English, National Research and Innovation Agency. This is completely new agency in Indonesia, covering all of the research and innovation activities across this country. And this agency is fully funded by the government of Republic of Indonesia, and hopefully we will consolidate all of the governmental research institutions across the ministries, yeah, and institutions, including the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, National Nuclear Agency, National Aerospace Agency, and another institutions. So I think this is very timely for me to join this webinar in accordance with the anniversary, how many years? 204 years of anniversary of the Bogor Botanical Gardens. Yeah. So since LIPI, the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, is going to be consolidated under BRIN, so from now on, BRIN will also be responsible for the development and also the management of all of botanical gardens across Indonesia. So I would like to thank to Dr. Paul Smith and colleagues who have joined this webinar and will be delivering some talks, yeah, and I highly expect that we can improve, we can continue, yeah, collaboration with your institutions, yeah, and even we can strengthen and extend the collaborations with another, not only with botanical gardens, yeah, under LIPI, but also with another research units, yeah, across under the management of BRIN, yeah, because hopefully we will have more than, at least for this year, we will have more than 80 research units, yeah, under the management of BRIN, and some of them are closely, very closely related to the life sciences, yeah, and of course also in some area related closely with the conservation or something like that, yeah. So I would be very happy if you could extend your existing collaborations with another research units, later on. So please let me know, if you have something or new idea, and we can discuss it further in more details with team from the Bogor Botanical Gardens and also Dr. Hendrians and his colleague, at Bogor. So actually, I have already provided with Pak Hendrian so many pointers, Pak Hendrian, But I would like to apologize since I didn't have enough time to read over the pointers. So So before concluding my welcoming remarks, I would like to inform all of our potential partners, especially from global partners, that one of the main targets of green is green economy and blue economy. So I think this is very important point for some of you. Very important point for some of you, because Indonesia is very rich in terms of biodiversity, and also we have very huge Indonesian water, and most of them are still underexplored. So we will put a lot of efforts, and new investments to provide much better infrastructure to improve the capabilities of our colleagues under green to conduct advanced research and exploration, not only on terrestrial area but also across Indonesian water, including the deep sea. I don't know if this is also some you have some interest or not, but at least I'm very happy if you could pass this information to your colleague, wherever they are. If you have some colleague from marine research or something like that, we will open all of the infrastructures, and we are also planning to open the call for proposal, to make use of the sailing days, for example, sailing days using our fleet of research vessels, in the near future, hopefully starting from next year, So and then on top of that, of course, conservation is very important, but we have to move further. How we could utilize all of our mega biodiversity, and make it as to make our biodiversity to have more economical impact, to our society, not only for Indonesian people, of course, but also for human being, in general. So in order to make all of that, I think it is very important to improve also our research quality, the quality of our research, not only the quantity, quantity is very important, but also the quality, So regarding to the research quality, I think having global collaborations involving some global partners are very, very important, for all of us in Indonesia, and in particular within green, to improve the competency and also the capacity of our researchers to conduct better research in the future. So I think this is all what I would like to mention in this welcoming remarks. So lastly, please allow me to express my great appreciation to the Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Garden, the Bogor Botanical Gardens, Dr. Hendrian and his colleague for organizing this webinar, and also for all the speakers and invited speakers, for sharing your valuable knowledge and allocating your precious time to join this webinar. Thank you very much. I hope this webinar will provide good platform for all of you to have fruitful discussions and sharing knowledge and so on. So as already requested by Mbak Eka, before concluding my welcoming remarks officially, by saying Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, I would like to officially open this webinar with the theme on what is the theme? I don't remember. Botanical gardens and
era.
Sorry, botanical gardens in the pandemic era. Thank you. Thank you very much. So enjoy the webinar and stay safe and healthy. And hopefully we can see face to face. In the near future after the ending of this pandemic. Thank you. Terima kasih Pak Hendrian. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I pass the floor back to Mbak Eka.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Bapak Dr. Laksana Trihandoko. Ladies and gentlemen, this two-day international webinar in commemoration of the 204th anniversary of Bogor Botanic Gardens and the 54th anniversary of the Indonesian Institute of Sciences has been officially opened by His Excellency, Chairman of National Agency for Research and Innovation, Bapak Dr. Laksana Trihandoko, Master of Science. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for group photo. Since this is a webinar setup, only panelists are seen and able to make audio-visual communication. Attendees can only see and listen to the panelists. Therefore, I would like to ask to all panelists to turn on their video for a few minutes for the group photo.
This is the most important session,
Please give us your warmest smile for the group photo. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, terima kasih. Please allow me to excuse because I have another meeting.
Thank you.
Terima kasih semua. Okay, thank you very much.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and now we will continue to the main agenda, which is presentation given by our prominent speakers. The presentation will be given by Dr. Paul Smith, Secretary General of Botanic Gardens Conservation International, United Kingdom. Dr. Therese Cho from Singapore Botanic Gardens, Singapore. Ed Aiken, Master of Art, Master of Horticulture from Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, United Kingdom. And Dr. Didit Oktapribadi from Bali Botanic Gardens, Indonesia. This session will be chaired by Dr. Dian Latifah. Starting this session, I would like to briefly introduce Dr. Dian Latifah. She pursued her PhD in James Cook University, Australia. She's currently the coordinator of research collaboration between Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, and Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew. She's also the coordinator of research group on seed conservation of rare and potential plants. And she's currently the head of Cibodas Botanic Gardens. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Dian Latifah to lead this session. Dr. Dian Latifah, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Eka. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We are going to start our talk session with theme Botanic Gardens in the Pandemic Era. This session consists of presentation in a panel and discussion. Each speaker will have 20 minutes for presentation. Allow me to remind you 5 minutes before the presentation ends. Participants in this Zoom webinar room may ask questions through Q&A, not in a chat box, please, during the presentation. Participants on the YouTube channel can also deliver your questions using the live chat. Please write down your name and institution and the name of presenter or speaker you aim to ask. All questions will be answered by the speakers during the discussion session. However, due to time constraints, the speakers are also allowed to type the answer directly through Q&A or can be contacted by email anytime. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 4 excellent speakers for our first day webinar. They are Dr. Paul Smith, Secretary General of Botanic Gardens Conservation International or BGCI, Dr. Therese Chu, Coordinating Director of Operation and Development, Singapore Botanic Gardens, Ed Aikin, Master of Arts, Master of Horticulture, Deputy Director and Head of Landscape, Horticulture and Research Department, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, UK. And Dr. Didit Okta Pribadi, Director of Eka Karya Bali Botanic Gardens, Indonesia. To begin with, let me introduce our first speaker, Dr. Paul Smith. With a career spanning 25 years working in conservation, Dr. Paul Smith joined Botanic Gardens Conservation International or BGCI in March 2015. He is also the former head of Millennium Seed Bank, Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, UK, and during his 9 years at the helm, seeds from more than 25,000 plant species were conserved in Millennium Seed Bank. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Paul will present about improving botanic garden resilience to man-made and natural disasters, lessons from the pandemic era. Please welcome Dr. Paul Smith.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen and get that working, and we'll take it from there. Right, I'm hoping people can see that. Is that clear, Dia?
Very clear.
So you're on mute.
That's clear.
Yeah. And you can see the full screen, I hope.
Yeah, that's full already.
Good. Well, thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here, and congratulations to Bogor Botanical Garden on your 204th anniversary. And I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak and to really kick off this 2-day webinar, looking at lessons from the pandemic era. What I'm going to do this morning is just to try to set the scene around man-made and natural disasters and the way that botanic gardens deal with those disasters. We're going to hear from Singapore, from Bali, and from Kew about how the pandemic has been dealt with. So I'm not going to go into detail about how gardens have managed the COVID-19 pandemic. Instead, I'm going to present some data that we have on the way that gardens are dealing with a wide range of man-made and natural disasters. But before I do that, I think it's good to remind ourselves of what botanic gardens are, and particularly the role that they have to play in research and in managing natural resources. BGCI did a review a few years ago now around defining the botanic garden, how to measure performance. And these were obviously the main features that came through. Botanic gardens were about conservation, collections, research, and education. Most gardens have strategic plans, so you know there is a path, if you like, to follow. And most gardens, although not all, have institutional measures of performance and success. The good news is that we are more relevant than we have ever been. and botanic gardens have quadrupled over the last 30 years. When we looked at the words most commonly used to describe botanic garden missions, it's very clear that conservation, research, collections, education come out very strongly. And it's important to remember that in the context of resilience. Particularly, we heard earlier from the chairman about the green economy, how we can learn to live more sustainably. And one of the challenges there, of course, is dealing with the effects of climate change, dealing with extreme weather events, and learning in a way that is useful to society, not just to ourselves. And if we look at what defines a botanic garden, then these are the criteria which came out of that review. And the ones in red really point to our role in carrying out research in the way that we manage plant diversity, but also the way that we interact with the environment. We have an underlying scientific basis for our collections. They're well documented, which means that we can study things like resilience to climate, pests and diseases, and so on. We have a role in monitoring and long-term maintenance. And botanic gardens, as Bogor is a perfect example, are long-term institutions. They have that continuity, in Bogor's case, 204 years. That's really important when it comes to natural resource management, because it is a long-term undertaking. We have a role in communicating information, our research and so on, and our knowledge to the general public and also to other institutions. And it's really important that those collections that we have are not just there for people to see on the weekend. They are there to support scientific and technical research. And then finally, a new area that we identified as being important for modern botanic gardens is environmental sustainability. Yes, covering areas such as renewable energy, water, waste recycling, and so on, but also understanding how we can work more sustainably with the environment going into the future and hopefully survive as a species. So what does the Botanical Global Network look like? We have more than 3,500 botanical organizations on our digital register garden search. Those are a wide range of different institutions, botanic gardens, arboreta, universities, forestry research institutes, non-government organizations, community-based organizations, and so on. The common denominator is botanical knowledge and having a botanical focus. And of course, those institutions occur right across the world in a wide range of habitats and diverse landscapes. And many of them are involved in managing protected areas. Missouri Botanical Garden, for example, manages 13 protected areas in Madagascar, as well as in the US. And critically, we have world-class research infrastructures, native plant nurseries, seed banks, tissue culture labs, and so on, which are really right at the top when you compare to forestry and agriculture, for example. Perhaps most important of all, we have expertise. Within BGCI's network alone, we estimate around 60,000 scientists, horticulturists, and educators, covering a wide range of disciplines to do with plant diversity, yes, but also to do with ecology and environment. And that is our greatest asset. And I think it's really important that we apply that knowledge to help society to be more resilient. So when you look at a map of the world's botanic gardens, it's quite clear that we have a bit of an imbalance. Most botanic gardens, for historical reasons, are in the Northern Hemisphere in temperate regions. This is a pity because, of course, plant diversity is concentrated in the tropics, in Mediterranean ecosystems, and so on. And what this means is that we need to work together. We've got this terrific resource, a global resource, and working together is extremely important to learn from each other, support each other. And one of the things I most enjoy about the Botanic Garden community is how close we are. I think it is a very strong global community, as we're seeing today, with all of the messages of support that have come to Bogor. So What BGCI was interested in, and this was triggered to a certain degree by the pandemic, was to what extent botanic gardens are prepared for various man-made and natural disasters. So we ran a survey earlier this year to see, what the main disasters being faced by botanic gardens were. And 96 institutions from 43 countries responded to the questionnaire. And there were a whole range of natural and man-made disasters, I'm afraid many of them man-made, which we had expected, and even some that we hadn't expected. The pandemic obviously has affected a very large number of botanic gardens across the world. It's a global pandemic, and more on that a little bit later. But not far behind it is drought, frost, ice, hurricanes, cyclones, typhoons, and so on, floods, sea level rise for some, and then some things that we hadn't even sort of thought of as being sort of catastrophic events, things like animal damage, oil spills, and so on. To give you some examples, wildfire. These are quotes from some of the gardens that responded to the questionnaire. Armenia, they're seeing wildfires nearly every year. We're hearing the same from Mata Atlantica in Brazil. Mexico, fires and drought are permanent and more frequent and intense each year. And then for some gardens, really catastrophic wildfires. In 2019, Mount Tomar in the Blue Mountains in Australia was hit by a fire, which obviously people lost their lives, but also destroyed about a third of the botanic garden there. So a really catastrophic event for that particular garden. But again, something that Australian gardens are now experiencing nearly every year. Drought is a similar story for some gardens. Again, from Mexico there, fires and drought are permanent and more frequent and intense each year, decreasing precipitation. Haiti there from Botanic Garden Decay, drought every 2 years. Australia, Philippines, California, and even Hungary in Europe, a drought over the last 10 years. At the other end of the scale, floods, we're seeing largely in temperate regions, but increasing floods in Canada, the US, Europe, Pakistan, Russia, and so on, and certainly in this country, in the United Kingdom as well. And then going down to the tropics, whatever you call it, whether it's a typhoon, a cyclone, or a hurricane, tropical storms are causing massive problems. On the Pacific coast, in the Caribbean, in the Indian Ocean, in the South China Sea, we're seeing much more frequency of these storms, and gardens are having to learn to be resilient to those storms. And then finally, the pandemic. And the pandemic, as I say, has affected nearly everybody, but to different degrees. And I'm sure we'll hear about that from our speakers later this afternoon. But this is fairly typical. The Bermuda Botanical Gardens, where gardens are relying on visitors for their income, and tourists in particular. The pandemic has hit them very hard, and loss of income, loss of jobs and positions. And we're still, of course, the pandemic has taken lives. Unfortunately, Colombia is not alone in this. We've had reports of staff being lost, losing their lives to the COVID pandemic right across the world over the last year and a half. Now, if you think your garden has been hit badly, then spare a thought for some gardens which seem to experience all of these things simultaneously. And I think probably the champion garden here, as far as our questionnaire is concerned, is Oklahoma City Zoo and Botanical Garden in the USA, which over the last few decades has experienced drought, floods, snow, extremely low temperatures, heat waves, and then the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. So clearly, botanic gardens have a lot to deal with. And our key interest really is how we're managing that, and are we learning lessons and able to teach each other and work with each other. So we were interested in the main impacts initially, and those for extreme weather events and fire, damage to collections, damage to facilities, temporary closure, income reduction, and in some cases, sadly, loss of life. The pandemic is similar, except without the damage to infrastructures and collections. Although in some cases, collections have suffered too, because people have not been able to go in and maintain them. But you can see that these are severe impacts. And we were interested then to understand whether institutions had received technical or financial support in the wake of any of these disasters. And 55% had, but surprisingly, 45% of gardens that responded had no technical or financial support. And we were interested in whether this was, geographical, whether it was to do with, whether it was developed countries versus least developed countries and so on. But looking at the data, there is no pattern there in that respect. And it's probably more to do with the kind of institution that it is. So for example, many botanic gardens in the US are private run or charities, and they would not have received any government support. When we looked at who was providing support, it was clear that governments were the most common source of support, with 72% of respondents who had received support saying that they had received that from the government. Financial support was the most important, and that ranged from a few $1,000s to several $1 million, depending on the disaster, the impact, and also where they were. But encouragingly, also gardens were receiving support from individuals, from philanthropists, from NGOs, corporates, and even voluntary groups, which really shows that we are well embedded in society and not purely dependent upon government. And it's great to see that gardens have received support from so many sources. Financial and collections recovery support was regarded as most important, not surprising, followed by staff retention, future mitigation, and infrastructural support. So those are obviously key for recovery. And then we were interested in really whether gardens had learnt lessons. So the question was, to what extent are you confident with the current level of knowledge and capacity of your institution to effectively respond to and manage a future disaster?
So do you have
Thank you. Thank you. And it was clear that the greater the recurrence of disaster events, things like wildflower, drought, flood, and so on, which are becoming more common, that organizations felt they can respond to those and manage them more effectively. Organizations also felt confident about managing future pandemics. And I think this is because it's been so prolonged. It's also been profound. So, it's created such disruption that people have had to come up with solutions. And there is now widespread experience in managing sort of pandemic conditions. Gardens, not surprisingly, were least confident about managing future infrequent and catastrophic events, things that can't necessarily be predicted: armed conflict and war, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, and so on. So we were interested also as to whether gardens had responded with having plans or a policy for managing disasters. And surprisingly, nearly half of these gardens, all of whom have experienced disasters of some kind, do not have disaster management plans or policies. And that matters because the elements of a disaster management plan include a whole range of important knowledge and interventions: risk assessment, structural measures to improve resilience, collection-specific actions, for example, duplication of material, selections of the right kind of plants that are climate resilient, for example, maybe for typhoons or whatever, fire, and so on. communicating with staff, communicating with your visitors, training your staff in disaster management, visitor evacuation, first aid, moving online, which has happened in the pandemic, of course. It's the reason we are talking the way we are. And coming up with contingency plans and, where possible, getting insurance. These are really important, and it's important that, that these policies are in place. So BGCI will be producing a technical review with the results of this survey, and that will include 30 to 40 case studies of gardens who have managed these different disasters in the most effective ways. And what we're hoping is that will be due in September, that that will be a resource for other gardens. You know, as I said, there's 3,500 gardens around the world, to learn from each other. And we'll also bring our tools to play here as well. For example, BGCI's Directory of Expertise. I think at the moment it has 11 subdisciplines on it, but we will include a discipline there of disaster management, and we will encourage people to register for that who have led on disaster recovery in the gardens that they manage. So I'm going to leave it there, and thank you all for listening. And hopefully set up the talks that will follow, that will give you much more detail from gardens that have been dealing with the pandemic and exactly how they've gone about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your valuable presentation. I'd like to highlight that we are very strong global community, especially Botanic Gardens. We together can share experiences how to deal with man-made and also natural disasters, not only pandemic. Please, ladies and gentlemen, coming next, we are going to have a presentation by Dr. Therese Chu. Please allow me to introduce her. She is the coordinating director in Living Collections and Facilities Management at Singapore Botanic Gardens. She is also a center director of Forest Research Center. Dr. Therese Chu is specialized in operations and development and evolutionary biology of ferns. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Therese Chu will talk about Singapore Botanic Gardens, our COVID experience. Now I kindly invite Dr. Therese Chu.
Hello. Can you see the screen? I think I put up. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Diane, and thank you so much to BOGO for inviting me to this event. It's a great honor to be here, to be sharing a little bit about what our experience at the Singapore Botanic Gardens has been this past year. And I really look forward to hearing from the other gardens as well, because it's been an intense year and quite focused, blinkered on getting things done. It'd be good to hear how other gardens are faring too. Okay, so first, so this is the Singapore Botanic Gardens, a couple of pictures here. I just want to lay it out that this presentation is going to be a lot from the operations perspective. I'm basically where we are in the gardens. I run the living collections and facilities teams, so it's very ground operations based. And actually a lot for us anyway, a lot about managing COVID has been all the snap operational things this past year as well. Okay, so first a little bit about the Singapore Botanic Gardens, just in case you're not aware. Okay, so the Botanic Gardens of Singapore is actually a division under the larger government organization of the National Parks Board. This is important because it really affects how we have been reacting to COVID, what our priorities have been. But the gardens itself is a much older institute than the National Parks Board. It's even older than independent Singapore, whereas we've been a scientific institute since 1859. We're not quite as old as Bogor, 162. We are 162 this year. We're also a World Heritage Site and a full Botanic Gardens Institute. But importantly, we are also a free public garden. And this is important in Singapore, which is land scarce. Everybody lives in apartments. So the Botanic Gardens, I don't know if you can see in the picture, it's somewhere in the middle of the main city area. And it's basically an open free garden for Singaporeans and residents to come all the time. We're about 82 hectares large, and pre-COVID, we had about 5 million visits annually. Most of these are locals, about a quarter perhaps would have been tourists, especially coming to our orchid gardens. But a large part of this are visitors from around our local catchment. Okay, well, this is just the different parts of the garden, which I'm sure is quite familiar to everybody. We manage living collections. We have a research and conservation group. We have a lot of outreach and education, and that is both in terms of programs as well as events, exhibitions, and shows. We're quite a big hub for this kind of thing. And then, of course, the other basic facilities, like operations like facilities and visitor management and security. So just to give you an idea a little bit about how COVID has affected Singapore. So just like the rest of the world, we were watching COVID build up in the beginning of last year. And for us, it was the worst between about March to June last year. And so this little graph in the bottom here, I just pulled out from Google. It's just the number of number of new cases reported throughout per day throughout the year. You can see that we had the biggest spike sometime in the earlier part or middle part of last year. And what basically happened was we had a 3-month circuit breaker, which is what we call our lockdown, where most things shut. And this was when we had the greatest number of cases in the community. And then after that, since about August last year, or even a bit slightly earlier, it's been quite stable, and Singapore has been opening up progressively, trying to open its economy back to make sure things go back to normal. Of course, they call it a phased progressive opening, but of course, it's also a opening, tightening, depending on when things get bad. Like right now, we're coming to a little bit of a heightened measures now because our numbers are going back up again. But overall, Singapore is actually, other than those few months, sometime last year, it's been quite under control. Of course, though, when it did hit, it was a major disruptor to the gardens. And I basically, everybody was, what's going to happen next? It was unclear, but what we knew was events, shows, conferences, research trips, everything that we had planned for in the months were all canceled. We had huge problems when it comes to workforce and safety of everybody. So everything was delayed or uncertain what was going to happen. And of course, working style, as everywhere, had to change. But one thing that I want to note about the Singapore Botanic Gardens is because we're also part of the government and we're a free open space, it was keeping the gardens open was considered an essential service to Singaporeans. So we had to be open to the public, and we had to be, a big part of our work then was making sure we had all the processes to keep staff and members of public, everybody who comes to visit the gardens, safe. So this was a huge focus for us, which is how do you keep the gardens open and safe at the same time. So, okay, so this is a very, this is our immediate response, and I make it sound very calm and collective. We basically had to reprioritize our work, redeploy our staff, and figure out what to do. Of course, when it was actually happening, if you ask people, I suppose they would say it felt a little bit panicky or controlled chaos. Policies were changing all the time when it came to group sizes. Let's close the lawns, let's close the car parks. Every day was something different. So a lot of this, especially in those few months, were really managing all the changes that we had to do to keep the gardens running. But essentially, if you look down on it, it was basically a reprioritization of work. So we had to look at what our whole scope of work was, scope it to just the essential parts that we had to keep open and doing, even though we had problems with deployment and resources. We had to do a lot more about visitor management. And then, of course, to be able to do all this, we had to figure out how to deploy our resources, which were mainly staff resources, into doing everything that we needed to do. So a lot of this, a lot of the work the Botanic Gardens keeping open actually is very, all these operational stuff is thanks to all the new job scopes loaded onto the researchers, loaded onto my event staff and education staff and horticulture teams who suddenly had to step up and do many different roles that they weren't doing previously. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of the kind of, what happened. Okay, so of course, on the internal point of view, ensuring our staff is safe is a huge priority. So of course, there was work from home where possible. Vulnerable staff, like we have quite a large group which are above the age of 60 or 70 even, were kept away from the members of public and kept them safe. At the same time, this is quite standard stuff, splitting teams. We had to split it both in terms of areas as well as time. So this was just all the standard things to try and keep our staff safe. But then when it came to managing visitors, we had to do a whole bunch of things. So I call this closures during flare-ups, even though this was mostly during the COVID, our circuit breaker 3 months. Actually, we are starting to do this again, where we had to be very conscious of, okay, if people were gathering too big, we had to quickly close our lawn spaces, our playgrounds, water features, car parks, our attractions, had to reduce the number of people per square meter, etc., etc. So there was a lot of closures to manage people, and then also a lot of direct intervention with managing group sizes and telling people to put their masks on and telling people to exercise in smaller groups and not to picnic and blah, blah, blah. So here's just some photographs of so we still had lots of visitors coming in where we had to go advise, closing some of our areas. Lawns had to be closed, keeping exercise groups small. Then a lot of us were considered official safe distancing enforcement officers or advisory officers sent out to go and nag people basically about following the rules. But on top of that, so those were especially in the first few weeks or months, but actually one of the things that the National Parks Board came out quite quickly with was that because so many Singaporeans were stuck at home, they wanted to visit all the parks and gardens. So this is quite a nifty little app that came out quite quickly, which shows where the actual managers had to input like whether the visitorship was high, moderate, or low, so that Singaporeans could go onto the app and then see, oh no, I shouldn't go here because it's closed or the visitorship is too high. So this is the kind of thing that we pumped this out quite quickly, but it was actually very labor intensive because the staff ourselves had to go update this constantly. But this is the kind of thing that we had to do to manage the crowds coming in and out. And then over time, we have also been progressively using technology or whatever we can to try and reduce the massive amount of resources required and to make things more streamlined. So we put in a lot of automatic things so that you could reduce touch points, so automatic doors, automatic sensors or your taps. All our entrances to our museums and everything have to have all these safe entry. So on the right side here, this is a Singapore-wide sort of contact tracing safe entry program where people have to log in. So you have to log into different parts of the gardens. You have to take temperatures. So we had to follow all those rules as well and put in place all this stuff. But I also want to touch a little bit about actually adjusting our ground operations. So a huge group that was affected by COVID in the beginning months, especially, were all the foreign workers who were living in dormitories. So in the Singapore Botanic Gardens, a large part of our workforce actually are these third-party or contract companies with their workers mostly from India. And because of the COVID in the dorms, a lot of these companies, they were put on quarantine and locked down. So our workforce in the gardens was also cut quite drastically, especially at some point. So this is not just in the garden, it's landscape industry in general in Singapore. Actually, not just landscape industry, the marine sector, the construction sector as well. So during that point in time when it was actually a big concern then was being able to do our very basic operations because there were the manpower was not around. So that was when we had to scope down our operations to just the bare essentials to actually look at public safety only. So these basically were things like tree works, pruning along roads so they don't block the roads, and watering to make sure our collections don't die. Lots of things were just thrown out. Other things were thrown out the window. So no more pruning for aesthetics, no more new planting. Some areas were just closed because we couldn't manage trees, or we couldn't be pruning trees. So for safety reasons, we had to do that. So this was when we had to really look at what we were really effectively use the resources we had. And some ways, some of the lifesavers actually for us, if you see in the bottom left corner here, this is one of our robot mowers, which we've had for several years, and they were a real lifesaver because there was no grass cutting in most of Singapore, but luckily in the Botanic Gardens, our main lawn areas, we have these robot mowers going around doing it for us. So at least we still had cut grass. And then here in the bottom right picture as well, a lot of this was, these are my my horticulture staff who don't normally or don't always do as much hands-on work as they had to do in those 3 months. So a lot of this is also reprioritizing and seeing how to get more people doing work on the ground as well. It was quite a nice opportunity to be able to do that actually. Okay, and then at the same time, we actually had 2 major construction projects. So these are just some of the many different things we had to do in the development sites. Construction sites especially had so many rules. So they had to designate the entry and exit points, the way you zone people so that they are separated, audited on site, constantly cleaning with antiseptic sprays, all the doors, handles, lorries, and briefings, etc., etc. So these are just, I'm pretty sure this is quite standard everywhere else, but all this kind of takes time to put in place and then make sure that it actually people follow through. And then as we transitioned, as we got, we managed to get a hold of the real ground ops in the second part of last year, especially we were started trying to see how we could then look at the other functions and what we could do. And a big part of this was clearly transitioning into more the digital realm. And in this regard, I think, so a lot of effort was put in by my events teams, outreach teams to look at what they could do. We were not terribly strong at digital outreach in the past, so we were scrambling around and learning. So here's an example on the left, a live webinar about orchids and orchid growing put up by our staff and then our third-party people coming in too. Here's another on the right is a YouTube video where we talking about growing orchids, which is one of our specializations in the Botanic Gardens. So we had to grab our horticulture staff and make them into new celebrities. So this is all a bit of a learning curve for us to do. But we put through quite a lot of others as well. So here on the left is a virtual tour. So all our tour guiding and all that was stopped. So we had our staff go around and give virtual tours. I think we have about a dozen of them, dozen videos out there. And then our partners as well. So so on the right here is an example of our partners with some of the arts groups. So the symphony orchestra, or in this case, I can't remember who this is, a jazz group, who also turned digital as well. So use the gardens as a venue to live stream or host their concerts so that they could reach out. And even though we couldn't have big events like what we are used to in the garden, where we have big shows, big plant shows or big concerts and all this, we found that we didn't get rid of our events completely. And I wanted to highlight this one at the end of the year last year, which was basically it's like a Christmas light up, call it Trees of the World, where we put out about almost, I think more than 150 native trees for the community and for sponsors to come in to decorate. And this was a huge undertaking, especially when we had to safe distance and make sure people come in slowly one by one. But it was worth it in the end because people have been so starved of places to go to and getting involved that it was really nice. It was huge response for volunteers to come in and decorate trees. We had a lot of corporate sponsors who came in to donate for trees. So yeah, on the right here is actually just a little Facebook. Here's a nice picture by our Prime Minister. I just grabbed it from Facebook because I don't have a nice picture.
You got 5 minutes?
Okay, 5 minutes, no problem. Yeah, so it was nice to still be able to do these events for our community as well. Okay, and then even though lots of things were delayed, we were still trying to push ahead of our core work as well. So in this case, we had 2 big development projects which were due to have been opened last year, the year before or the last year, and they were significantly delayed. But we eventually did manage to get them open earlier this year. And so on the left is a new extension to the garden, which was, it's not just a new area, we also had new museums to have an art museum for our archival material to be shared. And then the orchid gardens also got a revamp so we can new cool house where we can, or revamped cool house so we can look at our collections better. So a lot of this was work that should have been done earlier or wanted to be opened earlier, but we had to delay it quite significantly. But basically what I wanted to say quickly was that I've shared a lot about what we have done in the past year, but actually now we're coming into what I consider like the long tail of COVID. It's like we got infected by COVID ourselves. Initially, when COVID hits a place, it's all about the oxygen mask and getting the logistics in the hospital and everything. And only now we're starting to look at the real long-term effects, like whatever diabetes or whatever all those long tail effects are. And similarly for the Botanic Gardens, we have the chronic impact is maybe not fully felt yet, or we're starting to feel it. So clearly a lot of this is about being delayed and things not going as quickly as you want, but also it's that from a planning perspective, it's hard for us to figure out what we're going to do next when it comes to overseas training, overseas trips, our research projects that involve our collaborators overseas, going to new different places. And then this constant state of having to divert our resources kinds of dilutes your focus on some of the work that we want to do. And of course, we have to adjust to new normals with our contracts, with the way we work. And a lot of things are still a little bit uncertain of how things are going to pan out. So I don't have the answers exactly about what we're going to do, but we're starting to try and cope with some of these. I just wanted to end with 3 little personal reflections over the past year. They're really just for me personally, because I think a lot of the things, what we need to do is quite clear, or seems quite clear. I just wanted to, first one to me really hit me was that while we were, trying our best to be nimble and vigilant and adapt to all the different work, it's important to remember that this is really exhausting, overwhelming, and isolating to staff as well. And it's a huge pressure put on it. So a lot of this, while we are trying to keep open and keep things going, we have to keep on remembering about the staff morale, staff safety, and teamwork. And I think a lot of the reasons why we've gotten where we are in Botanic Gardens is because so many staff from other teams have stepped up to help others and do more. So yeah, this is good, and hopefully we can do more of this. Of course, this is obvious. I mean, it seems obvious that we need to continue innovating and moving into the digital realm. And some of this stuff we've been doing for a while, like the bottom right part here is just looking at digitization of collections. This is stuff which a lot of Botanic Gardens are doing. On the left, it's like moving into new digital outreach. But I think personally, it's also, I like to remember that we have to keep an eye on the goals and objectives of why we're doing this, and to what end, how much digital outreach should we do? Are we getting the same impact as what we want? A lot about gardens is the human and personal aspect of it, coming into the gardens and seeing plants and helping conservation projects directly. So these are some things that just rattle around in my head a little bit. But in the end, it's good to note that, my big takeaway is that our work really matters. And like what Paul said earlier, we remain more relevant than before. Here's just a few articles I pulled out from the newspaper in Singapore. Like the one on the right is that, everybody can't, a lot of Singaporeans are stuck at home, cannot travel. And suddenly they've rediscovered all these green spaces and gardens and parks and places. And our visitorships has remained constant or gone up. For us in the garden, we still are seeing about 5 million visitors a year. And this means that even though there are fewer tourists, more locals are coming. And then at the same time, also a greater appreciation for gardens and parks and greenery. On the left is in Singapore, I'm sure all over the world, actually, I've seen it, where more people are getting more excited about growing things. So this is a nice movement and something to keep the momentum up. Anyway, so I think that's it. I think I've run out of time as well. Thank you very much. This is just, this is a picture of the garden on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Teresu, for your nice presentation. I'm sure we do love your energy. And it's great to learn from a neighbor, Dr. Teres. Yes, it's quite a challenge to keep our botanic gardens open. And on the other hand, we should also ensure that health protocols are obeyed by the visitors, and how to care our plant collections with limited number of workers or financial support because of some restrictions. Ladies and gentlemen, after we see the experiences of Singapore Botanic Gardens dealing with the pandemic, We now move to Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. Our third presentation, entitled Botanic Gardens and the Pandemic Era, Crisis, Resilience, and New Opportunities, will be delivered by Ed Aiken, Master of Arts, Masters of Horticulture. Let me introduce him first. He is Deputy Director and Head of Landscape, Horticulture, and Research at Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, UK. He has expertise in landscape, land management, and living collections. Some of his biography are creating the 535-acre landscape and fostering research partnerships with Kew Science through the Landscape Ecology Program, using ecological approaches to make horticulture more sustainable and using the power of science to understand how landscape functions. Previously chair of London Parks and Gardens Trust, General Manager of Morden Hall Park and Rainham Hall in London. Some of his qualifications are Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, member of RHUL Industry Liaison Panel, and landscape advisor to Grosvenor GB&I. He also successfully published a book in 2020 entitled Rare Plants by Welbeck Publishing Group. Without further ado, Mr. Ed Aiken, time is yours.
Okay, good afternoon, good morning, everybody. Thank you for that introduction. I hope I live up to it. So I'm hopefully going to give a complementary perspective to Therese, and it's fascinating to hear how two gardens 8,000 miles apart have such sort of similar challenges and such comparable responses. So you'll hear some similarities and some contrasts, I hope. I think it's important just to sort of set the scene and to talk just very quickly about Wakehurst. So we talk about Wakehurst being Kew's wild botanic garden, and I will show you why. It has a long history. It was first sort of designated as an estate in the 14th century and came under the management of Royal Botanic Gardens Kew in 1965. It's quite a large botanic garden. It's 211 hectares. And it's diverse. It has horticulture, it has extensive designed landscapes, and it has lots of wild habitats. It's a place where conservation and horticulture and science sort of interlink in a really interesting way, and I love working here. It's also a home to Kew Science. So you'll see here the Millennium Seed Bank, which is a building, but also the centre of a 95-country international partnership and a campus of Kew Science. All sorts of scientific research happens here. And one of our missions is to bring the science out of our buildings and to explore science through our growing in our glass houses, to do growing-based research, but also to research our landscape and to research the natural capital, the services and benefits we derive from a biodiverse landscape. And I know biodiversity is a relative term. I'm talking about biodiversity in a UK context. I appreciate there's far more in some of the other locations involved in this meeting. Okay, just a very quick tour. We have some very ornamental horticulture. This is around the centre of the old mansion at Wakehurst, what you might call a typical English country garden scene. It's very beautiful. It's there just for sensory stimulation. It makes people happy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as my talk goes on. But step beyond that and you get into really quite an expansive landscape. This is the temperate woodland walk. So we had a devastating storm in 1987, which removed 20,000 trees in one night. So the response to that really was an amazing series of collecting trips, gathering seed with partners across the world, from New Zealand to Chile, to Tasmania, to South Korea, to the United States. We have a very temperate climate at Wakehurst, and we really tried to replicate some of the aesthetics, some of the dynamics of the places we collected from. So our tree plantings feel wild. It feels like you're stepping into a different part of the world. And then beyond that, we have our extensive nature habitats as well. So this is the Loder Valley Reserve. It's been continuously managed as a nature reserve since 1975. And it's a really sort of wonderful and enriching place to feel the sense of the wild, really very close to London. We're in the southeast of the United Kingdom, about 30 miles from London. So COVID hit us. I think in the UK, we had probably for a long time a belief that it wouldn't hit us quite as bad, or we had a special health service that would allow us to ride out COVID like no other country could. And my instinct, and this isn't a political view, is that probably throughout January and February of 2020, we didn't take it as seriously as we should have done, and we kind of tried to carry on as normal. It became clear around the third week of March that we couldn't carry on as normal, and indeed a lockdown was imposed, a national lockdown on the 23rd of March, which led to Wakehurst and really all other sites that weren't kind of pure open access being closed. And we eventually got permission to reopen, very similar to Singapore Botanic Gardens. We were sort of deemed to be a public good. We were deemed to be large and accessible and safe. And we got permission to reopen on the 1st of June. Like many other visitor-facing operations, we were nervous, but we were also cautiously optimistic. We felt we had strong operational experience, and we could easily predict how our visitors would move around the site and how to make the site safe. So we opened, cautious but optimistic, and we also hoped that people would want to visit. And all expectations were exceeded. Despite being closed for 10 weeks of our financial year, we still exceeded our visitor numbers from the previous year. And our visitor patterns changed. So previously we would have very quiet weekdays and very busy weekends. Now people were coming in steady pulses every day. And we had a pre-booking system as well, so we could predict exact numbers every single day. So our caterers knew how much food to order. Our visitor-facing teams knew when the busy moments were going to be. It was a strangely positive and optimistic way of working. Now, the numbers are one thing, but actually the demographics were another entirely. Our audiences became far more diverse, far more urban visitors, a much more ethnically diverse group of visitors. And I guess one of our long-held aspirations that we start to benefit more diverse audiences just came to life because, well, perhaps people's options were narrowed, and suddenly Wakehurst was a place to visit which people hadn't previously considered. Another interesting change was the way people were using the site. So the previous dynamic had been that almost all visitors would cluster around the top of the site, which is the most accessible part of Wakehurst, where it is level. And other parts of the site would be deserted. Suddenly everybody was everywhere. And the wilder parts of the estate were suddenly heavily populated. And whilst, for the horticultural team, our favourite quiet spot suddenly wasn't a quiet spot anymore, what it meant was actually some of our richest biodiversity, some of our most dramatic landscapes were experienced by everybody. And, our beautiful wild meadows, some of which are, 3 or 4 kilometres walk from the centre of the estate, were filled with people. It was like a public park, and it was just lovely that everybody was experiencing this nature. And as Therese was reflecting, the immediate impact on our horticultural team was a physical shock. It was a physical and operational shock. We were asked to reduce our team to 25% of its normal staffing overnight. And right at the beginning of our growing season. So in the UK, our growing season is only 6 to 7 months long. And March and April are critical months. It's where all of the hard work is done to set us up for the year ahead. So suddenly to have our team reduced so dramatically at such a critical time was a massive shock. And we just had to focus on keeping plants alive and keeping the site secure. That was the only thing we could really focus on. But over time, we started to sort of kind of come out of that sort of, response shock and start to say, well, what's happening here? And I guess something that we've been thinking about for a long time, which is the way we garden, we started to challenge a little bit. This is our Coronation Meadows. This is one of our species-rich grasslands. It requires very few inputs, and it sustains, I think, a high level of ornamental beauty for at least 5 months of the year. It also sustains a huge amount of attendant biodiversity. We have really high volumes of invertebrates and reptiles and birds who use this habitat. So high value and low inputs. Now, compare that to our very traditional style of horticulture, which still dominates some parts of Wakehurst. Now, I should say, it's always easy to use a bad photo when you're trying to show something you want to move away from. And this bed is in the process of renovation, but I wanted to just show you the type of horticulture which still we have a lot of at Wakehurst. So we call these island beds, and you'll see that there's always bare soil in this type of horticulture. Now, we all know bare soil is an inherently unstable ecological state, and yet so much of our gardening is trying to maintain bare soil. And I think really for us, this was the tipping point. We decided we had to move away really across the entire estate from this type of horticulture. We didn't have the staff at the time. And actually when the staff came back, why would we want to put labor into something which is inherently impossible to maintain? It just felt wrong. So I'm going to give you an example of where we're shifting to. So something we were actually able to finish during lockdown, which now seems near miraculous, is a new landscape called the American Prairie. And this is really our desire to bring some of the wildness from that temperate woodland walk I showed you up to the top of the estate. So just in the transition between the ornamental and the wild, it's still accessible, but we wanted people to feel like they had stepped into another country. And the American Prairie, it translates 3 US plant communities into a 2-hectare landscape. So quite a substantial landscape. It uses wild collected seeds through our US conservation partners, and it's also created using ecological establishment principles, which I'll just talk about a little bit more in a minute. And just to sort of show you why the US, this is a heat map from all of the conservation collections that the Millennium Seed Bank has undertaken in partnership with state, federal, and sort of private US conservation bodies. And the blue pins indicate our kind of gold standard for seed collection, which is 10,000 seeds from 50 plants. So the way we created it, we worked with a wonderful consultant from Philadelphia called Larry Weiner, who has created and restored prairie landscapes in the US. He steered us towards 3 plant communities matched to the 3 soil types across the landscape. An Atlantic coastal plain at the top, a South Central tallgrass prairie in the middle, and then a Pacific Northwest grassland at the bottom of the site where it's quite damp. Absolutely minimum tillage. So we really just wanted the soil just receptive enough to seed, but no more. And we direct sowed a base layer. So really the prairie pioneers, the first forbs and grasses that arrive in any prairie system, we direct sowed into the ground. And we did that really at the end of last summer. And the principle here is that this establishes we do nothing in the first growing season, which is the growing season I'm talking to you in now, but we do nothing but mow it. So we mow high at about 75 centimeters because we want it to just establish. All we want it to do is establish, because our mindset is shifting away from short-term impact to long-term stability. Systems that establish and for the long term have a sort of a consistent value to them, because we think that's much more in line with the values of horticulture and conservation that we practice. And just to sort of show you what's happened, so this is the Willamette Basin Puget Trough grassland. So this is from the Pacific Northwest. It's from the sort of the lower elevations around Mount Rainier. And we have here an emergent system, a really good balance, about 50-50 between grasses and forbs. We have rosette forming plants that are sort of inhibiting any sort of ingress from our native weeds. We already have a high degree of ornamental value. So for me, the test always, when you see visitors taking their phones out, they don't even know why they're taking their phone out. They just know that they're presented with something beautiful. They respond. They're not thinking, they're just responding. And we know that this is just the beginning. This is just the early days of a new sort of plant community system. And what we will do here, as with the rest of the prairie, is we will start to add plug plants. So at the end of this growing season, this will have been just very, very carefully sort of mown to allow it to establish. We add a live plant layer, really the emergent system. And this gives, really accelerates the succession process. So the plants that you would find within 10 to 12 years of a prairie establishment, we introduce within the first year. So it's just accelerating succession. And then another thing I wanted to reflect on, which I think of everything is the thing I could have predicted the least, was our ability to really move very, very fast on some large-scale research grant opportunities. As was mentioned in the introduction, we have a landscape ecology program at Wakehurst. So this is basically saying we have made a natural asset. We have brought biodiversity to our site. We think it's in good condition. Now let's science explain what's really happening. Let's build an evidence base to unpick this asset that we've created. And we have 4 kind of pillars that guide our research. So we're interested in carbon, we're interested in pollinators and sort of wider invertebrate services. We're interested in well-being, and we're also interested in hydrology. So carbon, pollination, well-being and hydrology, just to guide our research. And we had lots of work underway, but suddenly we had 2 really interesting convergent forces because of COVID. We had a group of visitors, where we had the UK population, actually, to be honest, locked down with only their local natural assets available to them, a brand new focus on nature, an interest in nature, and an astute government listening to the fact that nature was a priority, and a sort of a growing political sense that UK biodiversity could become a significant policy priority. And then the other factor was all of our all of our Q scientists at home. So Q is a very outward-facing organisation. Many of our 300 scientists spend a significant amount of their time overseas, working on overseas research projects. Suddenly they were all based in the UK. And I think a lot of them were thinking, well, perhaps now is the time to have a piece of UK-based research. So I had this window of time, this opportunity to grab all of our brilliant scientists suddenly interested and available in doing a piece of research at Wakehurst. And all of the tools, the virtual working tools that we'd dabbled in a little bit prior to COVID, but were suddenly native in, became incredibly enabling. Bringing together 20 researchers around a virtual table, I found it very, very effective. There was a structure and an order to how we met, and a way to bring people in and stimulate conversation, which I felt was facilitated by working on Zoom or Teams. We very, very quickly coalesced around 2 major research grant opportunities and developed all our documents through shared digital online documents. Again, another way of working that we really embraced through COVID. And actually, we've just had news that we've been awarded a very major research grant to research the link between carbon and biodiversity. And I know it was only possible through the ways of working we adopted via COVID. So just very quickly, you know, okay, thank you. As with a lot of the world, there's big discussions about net zero carbon and about offsetting and the way that landscape can deliver offsetting. And there's a school of thought that this will be done almost exclusively through planting coniferous trees on uplands. The nuanced view is actually that is not the answer. It might give some short-term gains for carbon uptake, but will it be good for long-term carbon sequestration? And our science teams have brought together a really novel methodology, combining remote sensing, so above ground work, looking at gas flux, and then below ground, looking at the role that mycology, the sort of diversity, function and abundance of fungal communities and the role they play in sequestering carbon. So looking in ancient woodlands like this, but also looking in grasslands like this, and how much carbon can be sequestered through a stable long-term system like that, as well as supporting a high attendant volume of biodiversity. So just like Therese, I wanted to sort of also finish on 3 reflections, which I think are complementary. So I think the first is to, when kind of presented with a major disruption, to trust your instincts. I think if you run a large practical operation like a botanic garden, you will have some inherent experience and judgments that are useful in these situations. Most fundamentally, how to prioritize. If you have a living collection which is dependent on you to stay alive, I think that really helps you to focus your mind. So trust those instincts. The second for me is to be honest. I've never managed through a pandemic before, and as was said earlier, guidance was changing on a daily basis. Rather than pretending I was a sort of higher authority that has somehow been through this before, just to say, look, I don't know, I've not managed in this situation before, I'm going to share my innermost feelings with you. I think we stayed connected as a team because we stayed honest about this very, very fluid situation. And then I think the final thing, which perhaps is obvious, is, let's really embed the gains that we've made. Let's ensure that we have genuinely broken some old bad habits. We know that some of the horticulture we practice is just inefficient and inherently unstable. Let's actually properly agree to move on from it. Let's stay with that virtual and connected working approach, even if we can meet in person. Only meet in person when it is the most effective thing to do. And I think, to carry on using virtual working and to carry on squinting at our laptops, I really think that there are some gains through working in this way. And then the final thing we really want to do is, in terms of those new audiences that have visited Wakehurst and connected to Wakehurst, can we just keep them with us on this journey now? Can we turn them from visitors into supporters, people who really want to not only continue supporting nature, but also want to understand why nature matters, and kind of stay with us on this journey as we demonstrate just how important nature is, the benefits and the services we can gain from it. So I will finish my talk there, and thank you very much to all of you for listening. Thank you.
You're welcome, Ed Ike. Thank you for your interesting presentation. Very colorful. So it's actually Royal Botanic Gardens at Wakehurst Place, right? Not at the one at Kew. It's like the 13 miles approximately from London. Very interesting botanic gardens. We all do see similarities and also contrasts, as you said, especially how you bring the sciences out to building, and we can see how the visitors enjoy the garden, or they do some restoration activities for utilizing the seeds, as well as applying best practices of plant conservation. Now, we know already what the new opportunities are during the pandemic era. Suddenly, more researchers with brilliant researchers. That's wonderful. We now proceed to the last presentation, an experiences from Indonesia entitled New Challenges in the Pandemic Era, Revisiting the Roles of Bali Botanical Gardens by Dr. Didit Oktapribadi. Dr. Didit got his PhD from Technische Universität München, Germany, with a major field in strategic landscape planning and management. He is currently the director of Eka Karya Bali Botanical Garden and still involved in research activities related to urban landscape and ecology, reintroduction and spatial ecology, and threatened plant conservation and management. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to present you Dr. Didit Oktapribadi. Unmute, please. Unmute.
Okay, thank you for the time, Bu Dian. So I will share my presentations here. Okay. Can you see it, this presentation?
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so Honorable Pak Hendrian, as the head of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, and honorable other speakers, I'm glad that I can join in this webinar. And actually, I got a lot of insight from other speakers, and it's quite interesting. So the title of my presentation is I will discuss about the new challenge in the pandemic era. So revisiting the roles of Bali Botanical Gardens. So I will try to explain what we have in this pandemic situations. Is from especially more from the optimistic point of view. Of course, we have should face a lot of difficulties, but in here I also want to highlight some opportunities that we may have to in this kind of pandemic era. So first of all, I want to introduce our gardens. The garden is built on 15 July 1959. I think it's similar with this Singapore Botanical Gardens. So in the next 2 months, we will have our anniversary, the 62th anniversary. The garden has an area of 157.5 hectares. And based on the data of our collection, we have 220 family, 1,020 genus, 2,435 species, and 23,013 specimens. If you look at the locations, actually is you can see in the right figures that actually we are close to this one is the Batu Kahu Natural Sanctuary. So the garden actually is like a buffer for the Batu Kahu Natural Sanctuary. But you can see in the right side, the places is already full with the settlement. So it's quite challenging to conserve the garden, is also to conserve the natural sanctuary of Batu Kahu. So I will also explain a bit about what kind of rules that should be done by the Indonesian Botanical Gardens. Actually, in Indonesia, we have a presidential decree number 93, 2011. So if we look at the business process, actually the main task of this botanical gardens is there are 3: to save, to study, and to use the Indonesian plant biodiversity. And this kind of task is expanded into 5 functions. This 5 function actually mentioned in the presidential decree number 93 2011, consisting of conservations, research, educations, tourism, and also ecosystem services. And regarding of the process, we do explorations, and here we define a location and plant species that should be collected or should be explored, and then we collect in the living plant materials and also including the data about their habitats. And then we bring the material into our nursery for acclimatization, data validation, and selections. And afterwards, we will transfer, if it's already ready, then we will transfer it into our gardens to for the collection management. So we do a lot of plant caring, plant care, consisting of planting, watering, pruning, fertilizations, controlling pests and disease, and tree health monitoring. On the other hand, we are also collecting the data, the growth of the plant collections, from the flowering, and then how the fruit and something like that. And then we also provide research services, including the plant identifications and providing plant material for research activities, and also we providing the plant and environmental data. And after the collection management, we also do research and development. So there are so many kind of research that we do, but basically is we want to know or to explore the potential of our plant collections. So some of the research is consisting of plant characteristic, plant habitat and distributions, plant adaptations, plant breeding, propagation, domestications. And there are 2 outputs that should be produced. The first one is domestications. It means that we should to reveal the potential of plant for material for food, medicines, cosmetic, ornamental, bioenergy, biomaterial, and so on. And the other one is how we study or reveal the potential of our plant collections for supporting the activities or programs like reintroductions, rehabilitation, and restoration. So basically, we have 2 outputs. The first one is to support prosperity, people prosperity, and the second one is support the sustainability. So all of these activities actually, and all the functions is actually related to the SDGs, how we achieve our SDGs target. For example, we want to reach the SDGs number 15, which is life on land. We try to conserve our biodiversity. For the tourism and ecosystem services, we actually we want to support the achievement of SDGs number 11 to develop sustainable cities and communities. And for the output, for the prosperity, we want to reach or to achieve SDGs 2 about the zero hunger, and 3 about good health and well-being, and 7 for affordable and clean energy. And for the ecosystem services and sustainability, we want to we want to support the achievement of SDG 6, clean water and sanitation, SDGs number 13, climate actions, and SDGs number 15, life online. So this is the general description of our business process and rules as Indonesian Botanical Gardens. So then I will move to the next slide. How about the situation about the COVID-19 pandemic? And I'll try to highlight some recent research findings that actually is also give us an opportunities, and I think it can be a reference for us in dealing with the pandemic, not only in the current situations, but also for the future situations. Because I don't think that the pandemic will be finished soon. Because I think we should try to learn, live with the pandemic for a few years in the future. Because yeah, maybe until we reach the herd immunity. So this is some research findings that yes, it's quite interesting. Actually, last year there is a special issues in urban forestry and urban greening journals, and some of my colleagues also involved in this special issue, and there are some interesting findings. I just show you some of them. It's like a Spanogy that try to study indoor-outdoor green features and the relation and its relationship with the psychological health. And the interesting finding is that the presence of plant pots, sunlight, green view, and accessibility of private green space and natural outdoor, and also environment. Yeah, actually, it can reduce. They can reduce the anxiety, anger, fear, confusion, moodiness, boredom, irritability, recurrent thoughts or dreams, poor concentration, and sleep disturbance during COVID-19 lockdown. So the lockdown is have a bad effect to the people. And the other paper, Young et al. Try to study how the relationship between the urban greenery with the leisure time physical activities. And the finding is also very interesting that they found that the people who live in the greener neighborhoods experience a lesser decrease in the leisure time physical activity. As you know, that physical activity is very important to support our immunity. And the other papers, still from Young and Q, is they study about the urban landscape pattern to understand and to evaluate the effect to the infectious disease risk, the risk. So they found that low fragmentation and natural large-scale ecological patches are important for preventing the infections. So I think the green open space is also is important for a border or for a buffer, because you know that the COVID-19 transmissions is higher in very dense settlements. The other paper is from Teodoro et al. They try to find the the relationship between gardening activities and psychological health, and they found that the gardening is related to lower psychopathological distress. So it can reduce the stress about because of the COVID-19 lockdown. The other paper is from Su and Su. Yeah, they try to analyze the microblood sentiments in Beijing city parks, and they found that during the period of pneumonia in COVID-19, the tourists in Beijing park generated more positive microblogs inside the park. And the most important element that make the positive emotion is landscape and plants. The other is Uristarasu. They study about what the effect of having plants at home during the confinement due to the COVID-19. So they also find that having indoor plants was correlated with more positive emotions. And the inhabitants or the people can allocate more time for plant maintenance. It's also very relaxing. And the other one is Ugolini et al. Try to study the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on the use and perception of the urban green space. So they try to study based on international exploratory study, jadi in several countries, and they find also that the respondent missed the most about the urban green space during the pandemic was spending time outdoors and meet the other people. So this is as well as important because it's also happened in our garden lately. Last weekend we have so many visitors that come to our garden. So this is the challenge from the urban perspective. Why urban is become important? Because the COVID-19 transmissions mostly occur in the urban areas. So this finding actually emphasize that there is an increasing demand for urban green space and for indoor or outdoor plant, and also for gardening activities. I will move to the next slide because I also involved in some discussions. It's also from some seminars related to the landscape ecology. So there is a big concerns about the environmental issue which is related to the COVID-19 pandemic, because as we know that the COVID-19 pandemic actually is caused by a zoonotic disease. So if we look at these figures, this is the major zoonotic pandemic outbreaks recorded in the history. So we already experienced this kind of pandemic outbreak since 1918. So it is a very long time. So that's why some expert in landscape ecology have an idea. We should limit the human contact with zoonotic pathogens. So the consequences is we should conserve our wildlife habitat and preventing our biodiversity loss, and we should create the healthier human environment. And if we look at this, I got it from the Misra et al. 2020. The linkage, the paper is discussed about the linkage between environmental issue and zoonotic disease. If we look at here, there are some environmental issue which is closely related to our rules as botanical gardens. I think it's not only for Bali botanical gardens, but also for Indonesia.
5 minutes more.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
So there are some issues related to biodiversity conservations, biodiversity loss, unplanned urbanizations, climate change. So we should develop our green space and restore our habitat. And also there's a deforestation and habitat fragmentation issue. So we should do rehabilitation and restorations. And for the industrial area, actually they produce a pollution. So this is also opportunity to develop plan for bioremediation. So other challenge is, of course, there is a need to develop herbal medicines to increase immunity system. And also, as Dr. Cho mentioned before, there are an increased online or virtual activities. So we also should respond to that. According to the head of the Indonesian Internet Service Provider Association, Syamalul Isa, the number of internet users in Indonesia until the second quarter 2021 has increased to 73.7%, or equal to 196.7 million users. So what we do in Bali Botanical Gardens. So this is, I already mentioned earlier that we have a lot of visitors. So as, like the other botanical gardens, we try to strictly apply the health protocol. And we actually limit the capacity. So we limit the capacity to 15% of the maximum capacity. So the number of visitors is only 11,000 and cars only 750. And cars is only allow entering the garden in the weekend and holiday time. So it's quite crowded, but we try to apply all the health protocol that we can afford. The other is, there is increasing demand for mainly for ornamental plant. In Indonesia, there is a really rising, very high price of the ornamental plant, right now. So this is a huge demand for the ornamental plant. And for the gardening activities, actually, we try to put some education material in our social media and also in our podcast. We build our podcast to communicate with the public and to educate the public how to maintenance their plant and so on. For the other challenge is the environmental challenge. Of course, we try to, we are really hard to try to maintain our collections. This is our nursery, and then our collection management. So we try to to save our falling trees here. You can see in the picture, and also controlling pests and disease. And also we doing regularly tree health monitoring, data collections, like the other botanical gardens. And we also do a plant propagations through tissue culture and also through other ways to for propagation. And then for other environmental challenge, we have a program, namely reintroduction and restorations. So in here we actually we study the area where we can restore the habitat or restore the nature, and then we try to study which kind of plants that suitable for this area. And we also doing regular monitoring to find out how the plant can grow, and then the progress of the restorations program itself. Regarding the other challenge, increasing demand for supplement and medicines, there are some.
Closing.
Okay, it's just only a few slides more. So for the other challenge, increasing demand of supplement and medicine, we have in here we have Balinese medicinal plant collections. We have 307 species from 490 species, which is written in Lontar Usada. Lontar Usada is a traditional Balinese book for medicines. And also we supervise for the Gianyar and Sanur Botanical Gardens development that focus on Balinese traditional medicine and wellness tourism. And for the last slides, to face the challenge in increasing demand for online communication and educations, we right now develop in our social media question and answer, podcasts, as I mentioned earlier, short video, photos about our collections, and other social media. So that's it. Thank you. There is links for information. If you want to have further information about Bali Botanical Gardens, you can visit it through this link. Thank you, Bu Dian. Sorry for the time.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Didit, for your highly valued presentation. Dr. Didit stated in the beginning that it is challenging to implement the plant conservation practices in botanic gardens with natural sanctuaries, but I think this is similar condition with Royal Botanic Gardens at Wakehurst Place. Of course, we could agree, Dr. Didit, that botanic gardens can be the most suitable site for physical practices to improve our body immunity, as well as to reduce stress, and also a lot of interesting findings that you already explained. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for discussion. We only have about 35 minutes. Hopefully, many questions have been answered by the speakers in the Q&A. Thanks, Dr. Paul Smith. And so please allow me to select some question. For the first question, we have here in Indonesian, I can translate it. Is there any some of your plant collection that is categorized as rare plants or threatened plants, which are collected in your botanic garden, as well as, for example, here Singapore Botanic Gardens? From this question is from Anandianto. I think from Singapore Botanic Gardens, Dr. Teres, you would you like to answer it?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, so we have collections. Yeah, so we have collections. Some things are quite rare. For instance, we have certain species that are endemic to Singapore, only were found here, and now we're trying to propagate them. So yeah, it's part of a botanic gardens. That's part of our work, trying to ex situ conservation for all these like threatened plants.
Hopefully, no, it's still taken care well.
Yes. Oh, okay. So yes, when it comes to the pandemic,
financial support maybe.
Yeah, when it came to like prioritizing the work that we had to when initial pandemic, of course, it'd be looking after our most important collections. So it was safety for trees as well as all the very rare things. We had to keep them alive.
Yeah, thanks for your answer. We'd like to give an opportunity to Dr. Henryan, if you like to raise some questions to the speakers.
It is allowed for me to ask the question. The question, actually. Paul, some botanic gardens, such as Singapore,
Okay, we can hear you.
Yes. Some botanic gardens, such as Singapore, are free public garden, but some others depend mostly on revenue coming from visitors for daily operationality. And the pandemic really puts them in a very, very difficult situation. I know that Pak Didit of Bali Botanic Garden just starts the optimistic way of anticipating this pandemic. But is there any case not by BGCI that a certain BG's botanic garden is heavily struggling with such problem? If so, then how do they deal with it? Because running botanic gardens and maintaining the collection is not easy. It needs quite a lot of money, and perhaps if you have a case like this, we can adopt some of the case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the things that we have learned during the pandemic is that gardens that rely almost entirely on visitor income, in other words, gardens which charge for entry, have suffered disproportionately because of obviously a drop in visitors. The example I gave from Bermuda, where many of their visitors were tourists. In fact, most of their visitors are tourists. I think so where I am here at the moment in Wales, in the United Kingdom, which is where I live. Normally I would be in Kew, but I haven't been in Kew for about a year. The National Botanic Garden of Wales here, I think probably about 70% of their income comes from visitors. It comes from gate fees, and it also comes from restaurants and so on, the shop. So
the rest of 25% is from government?
Yes, the rest comes from government, but also from things like research grants and so on. So it's you know, important to have a diverse portfolio of income. But what has happened with the National Botanic Garden of Wales is similar to what Ed described, and that is that in the short periods that the garden has been open, so in 2020, the garden was open through the summer period when we had a dip in COVID. We've seen many, many more visitors. So partly because gardens have opened different entrances, they've encouraged people to go into different parts of the garden. It's been well organized, keeping people distant and feeling safe. And I think, you know, this element which has come through with the three speakers about us providing a public service during lockdown in green spaces has encouraged people to come who wouldn't normally come. And so long as they feel safe and dispersed within the garden, then we've seen visitor numbers go up. We've seen the same thing at Westonbirt, the UK National Arboretum. Their numbers of visitors, actually, even though they've only been open for 50% of the year in 2020, their visitor numbers are higher than they were in 2019 in total, because so many people have come to the garden who wouldn't normally do so. So I think, you know, there are compensations provided that you are allowed to open by government for some period, because more people will come, provided people feel safe and it's properly managed. But the overall lesson, I think, is a diversity of funding gives you more resilience. That's not surprising.
One more thing, Paul. Is there any case noted by BGCI that involving privates to manage botanic gardens? And what is your opinion?
Yeah, so the vast majority of botanic gardens in the world are government institutions, and national government or municipal or associated with universities, there's no question. But in some countries, the US, for example, most gardens there are either charities or private enterprises, and their funding comes from you know, charitable fundraising or sometimes endowments. So they have quite a different model there. We're even seeing that in places like India, Europe, and so on, where there are increasing numbers of private gardens that, are, as I say, are usually funded through philanthropy or whatever. Now, BGCI, as you know, runs an accreditation scheme, a global accreditation scheme. We do not differentiate between government and non-government gardens, provided they meet the criteria, and of course we require evidence for that, then we don't differentiate between the business model, if you like. I should add that a really important criterion is compliance with international treaties. So if it is a private garden, it needs to be compliant with the Nagoya Protocol, with biosecurity, and with all of the things we would expect from our professional community. But I think the fact that there are different models out there, different business models, is healthy. And this is something that you know, we're keen to encourage, provided that standards are maintained.
Yeah, but one thing we should note about the private is that business and conservation is not always in the same boat.
That's true. And that's why I mentioned the caveats. I think when your business model is primarily about bringing in visitors, exposing them to green spaces, horticulture, Longwood would be a good example. It's the most visited garden in the United States. It's not a government garden. It's built on an endowment funnily enough, from the agriculture industry, from DuPont. But its mission is not conservation primarily. They're starting to get involved in some orchid conservation, but primarily it's to interest people in horticulture and so on. And there are many models for that, which might not meet our criteria for what is a botanic garden. It depends.
Thanks, Paul. Hatur nuhun, Budian, terima kasih.
Sami, you're welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we have several questions, but the questions are aimed to Mr. Aikin. There are 3 questions, but I think the one that is quite interesting is from Regina Wanti. There, Mr. Aikin, kindly offer me short explanation about the minimum tillage system in Kew Royal Botanic Gardens. Does it include the terracing in the steep landscape, if any? Thank you. This is from Pajajaran University, Bandung, West Java Province.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. This idea of no-till or zero or minimum till is, I think, coming mainly from kind of organic agriculture, and particularly the kind of increasing range of equipment available, and this whole principle that the less you disturb the soil, the more you can confer advantage on the plant community you want to establish. If the soil is hyper disturbed, everybody wants to get in, or plants with kind of from a more ruderal system, ephemerals will be equally invited compared to your plants. Whereas if the soil is minimally disturbed, you can potentially inject a plant community into the ground and give it a head start, that crucial head start that allows your choice of plants to become the one that's established. So if you look at organic agriculture, there's sort of no-till drill seeders that can seed multiple species plant communities underground and allow them to push up through soil that is essentially capped, i.e. it's not broken, it doesn't allow weeds in. We went through a bit of a hybrid system, so we just did basically a scratch of the soil, a very, very light scratch, just enough for our seeds to go in, and we also seeded into a thatch. So we had a nurse crop of grass which we sprayed off, and then we scratched that and we put our seed in. If you want to establish a new plant community, you just need to say, well, what advantages do I need to give it so it's successful in the long term? And success is not about how it looks in year one. We get so worried about deadlines and launches and spectacular new event coming. Take all of the deadlines out. Don't tell anybody you're doing it. Don't have a press launch. Let it establish quietly. Year 3, 4, 5, when it's starting to look beautiful because you've given it a slow, stable start, that's when you start to launch it. So it's as much about the framing of what you're creating as as the actual agricultural process you put in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Mr. Aikin. One question for Dr. Didit. It's in Indonesia, I can translate it. Does botanic gardens function as ex situ plant conservation for endemic biota, categorized as rare or nearly extinct? How could you manage that kind of plant collection in Bali Botanic Gardens? Maybe it's similar to what Dr. Teres Chu explained, or maybe you have some method.
Thank you, Bu Dian. Yes, of course. The one of the main tasks of our not only Bali Botanical Garden, yeah, but also the other botanical garden managed by LIPI, is to save the threatened plant species. But the problem is right now the land use change is very fast. It's happened very fast, so that's why it's like we should race with this land use change. Mm-hmm. So that's why we can not do it alone, but we should make cooperation with the local botanical gardens. Right now, we have totally 43 or 42 botanical gardens in Indonesia. 30, yeah.
38 local botanic gardens.
38 local botanical gardens, and 5 managed by Indonesian Institute of Sciences. Yeah, still a lot of work to do, and then and I just read another questions in it's a very interesting question in the Q&A. One I forget the name, but he asked whether the program of the development of local botanical gardens should stop because of this pandemic. I don't think so. I just think the otherwise. Yeah. So we should try to push this development of local botanical gardens, because as I mentioned in the presentations, we need to restore our forest and restore our nature. And so far, when we do restorations, usually we don't use the native plants. I think there is a interesting conference from BGCI. Maybe Dr. Paul will also explain that the key of the successful of the restoration is if we use our native plants. Yeah, I think this is very important. So that's why we should support the development of local botanical gardens.
Would you like to add, Dr. Paul?
Yeah, that's correct. We held a reforestation conference with Q in February that ran for 3 days and was looking at that particular issue. You know, one of our concerns, a major concern, is that there's a lot of large-scale tree planting going on around the world, often using inappropriate species, which A, will not survive, and in some cases will cause damage to biodiversity. So the conference was looking at that, and a paper in Global Change Biology came out called the 10 Golden Rules for Restoration and Afforestation, that sets out really the way that we believe afforestation and restoration should take place, and also a role for our community. And you'll be hearing more about that from BGCI over the next few months. We've had preliminary discussions with a number of gardens about potentially setting up a certification scheme for biodiversity specifically. No such thing exists currently. Really to try to persuade practitioners and people who are planting trees and calling it restoration, that they should be using native species of native provenance and so on, wherever possible. So yeah, I think it's a very live issue, and it's one that's going to continue. And the reason that botanic gardens are ideally placed for this is because we know how to grow a wide range of plants. Just to answer, you know, the various questions that we've had about rare and threatened plants, we know that globally, botanic gardens grow more than a third of known plant diversity, and around 40% of all threatened plant species are grown in botanic gardens or kept in seed banks. We need to do better. 40% is not enough, and you know that makes it really urgent for the reasons that Didit's mentioned. You know, is that we're in a race against extinction here, so we need to scale up our efforts. Finally, I would say that the pandemic has not necessarily reduced those efforts, which is good news. We've still seen people able to go out and do field work. We've certainly accelerated work related to red listing, and you know, Bogor and LIPI have been right at the forefront of that for the global tree assessment. So we've actually seen some real acceleration of some of our conservation activities during the pandemic, which is really good news.
Thanks, Dr. Paul. One question here. I like one of you maybe, or anyone would you like to answer this. How you manage allelopathic plants in your botanic garden so they will not surprise or kill the other plants, especially your plant collection? Anyone would to answer it?
This is more an anecdote, but we have the National Collection of Nothofagus, which is highly allelopathic in its function, and we grow woodlands of different species. So, you know, Nothofagus glauca in a woodland and Cumminghamii in another woodland. There is no field layer at all, no herb layer whatsoever underneath these Nothofagus. So all of our sort of native woodland plants, and particularly you know, the ferns like bracken, you do not see them at all. However, this is quite interesting. It's quite it's a very stable woodland system. It's a great scientific story to understand, you know, what is going on physically, biochemically to suppress the sort of the field layer. So it's quite effective. It's fine horticulturally. I think in terms of establishing new plant communities, I would always turn to our Q Science colleagues and say, can you do a risk assessment on anything in this list of plants that we're about to grow? You know, flag up anything that looks invasive, anything that looks allelopathic, anything that might be sort of toxic to our native fauna. And we will use that as a sort of a screening process to make sure that we're only growing things that we really, really trust.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Aiken. One question for Dr. Didit and also Dr. Teres Chu. If you have mosses or bryophyte in your botanic gardens, which are very sensitive to rising environmental temperatures, does your botanical garden implement some efforts to protect mosses related to global warming issues? Do you have that collection, mosses or bryophyte collection, Dr. Teres?
Okay, I can answer. Although I actually typed my answer to her already.
Oh.
We do have a bryophyte collection in Singapore. I would say amongst a few things, the bryophyte collection, because it's so small and moves around quite easily, it's something which is actually quite easier to manage because you can find different microclimates in different sites. But also, I think when it comes to, but if I take the question broader in terms of the climate change kind of issues that we're facing, I think in Singapore it's less about rising temperatures, more about the unpredictability of rainfall. And so this is more across the entire garden. It's something we need to look into, which is our water supplies and our sustainability of water practices. So mosses maybe is not really the huge worry because that's relatively easy to manage. Also, we have a cool house if you want to put the temperate ones there. But overall, we are a bit concerned about from the water perspective, and so are looking at various things to do there.
Thanks, Dr. Teres. How about you, Dr. Didit? Bali Botanic Garden is mountainous.
Yeah, for us, it's become the problem. We don't have any cool house like Dr. Chow and Singapore Botanical Garden. So some mosses also, I admit that some mosses species is also lost because of the increasing of the temperature, as you said, and as you see in my presentations, that there are a lot of places full with the settlements, restaurants, and also a hotel or something like that. So they can increase the temperature. So that's why it's become a big problem. Maybe someday we need also the cool house, but we want to conserve our not only for the Bali Botanical Garden, but also for the Batu Kahu Natural Sanctuary. So we still try to figure out, but we try to propose for the what we call in program in UNESCO program, like the we call it
biosphere.
Biosphere, biosphere, because man and biosphere, because not only the plant and also this garden and also the nature sanctuary, but this area also become important for the source of water, because there are 3 lakes in this area, and the people also use drinking water from these lakes. So that's why we want to propose this man and biosphere to protect or to conserve our, not only the plant, but also our water. But hopefully it will be successful. We want to have a support from all of you.
Thanks, Dr. Didit. One question from Indira. I think you got the answers already about the rare and unique plants collection managed by the Botanic Gardens that is represented by some of the speakers here. So another question for Dr. Didit again from Lindell from Australia. Question for Dr. Didit, not for me, Lindell. How have your programs to support kebun raya daerah or regional botanic gardens or local botanic gardens needed to change during this time? Have these programs? Oh, I think you answered already, Dr. Didit. How about Dr. Hendrian? What is your policy, Dr. Hendrian?
I think Dr. Hendrian is more understanding the policy.
It's about local botanic garden development.
So what's the main point of this of the question?
Yeah, I think Dr. Paul Smith also already answered it. Right, Dr. Hendrian?
Hello.
Yeah, you could answer.
Perhaps you can repeat the main message.
Yeah, the main message is
what is the main point of this?
What is your policy in local botanic gardens development?
Yes, firstly, of course, we will give a full support for the development of local botanic gardens. I think it's our pleasure to have more than 40 botanic gardens in Indonesia. It's a quite big result, I think, yeah. But then it should also be underlined that the role of LIPI, Indonesian Institute of Sciences, is to give mainly substantial assistance. It should be understood by all stakeholders. So we will focus on the assistance of the substantial, on how to running and maintaining the collection and the botanic garden as the whole. I think that's the main policy.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Henry.
Don't worry, we will give a full support of this.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Henry. Yeah, sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to give opportunity for raise hand question. Anyone would raise your hand to ask directly?
Pardon?
Mr. Yayan, how to manage raise hand question? Question from raise hand. Would you like to help me to let participants who would like to raise hand and ask question directly? Pak Arif, Pak Yayan.
Yeah.
Anyone would like to ask question directly through the raise hand feature?
Yes, Budian.
Okay, Mbak Ainun.
Okay, thank you. And my name is Ainun. I'm from Cibodas Botanic Garden. It's nice to meet you all and very interesting presentations. I just want to ask you an extended questions, maybe regarding private collections. To Paul Smith, I know that only a few botanic garden in the world that maintain the private collections. What do you think about what's the role of botanic garden to maintain a cryptogamic plants such as bryophytes? And maybe how do we manage these plants? Maybe Dr. Chu or maybe Ed Aikin can explain how do you maintain or manage the living collections, particularly? I know that in Kew Botanic Gardens, there is cryopreservation for the sport. And do you have any living collections in the garden for right now? And yes, for Paul, can you explain what the justifications for Botanic Garden to maintain the bryophyte collections? You know that I know maybe like less than 5%. Less than 5% of botanical institution in the world. It's just I don't know that information. Do you have any information about that? Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Paul.
Yeah, if I start with that, Ainan is absolutely right. We did some analysis in 2017 in the Nature Plants paper, and bryophytes are massively underrepresented in botanic gardens. We do well with angiosperms and with gymnosperms, but not with bryophytes. So we have a lot of work to do. I'm glad that the technical questions are going to go to Ed and others who can talk about filmy ferns and so on at Wakehurst. But one way that we're tackling this as BGCI is to set up global consortia and those are groups of international gardens working together on difficult groups. So far, I think we've set up 7. Bryophytes is not amongst them yet, but if any garden is interested in leading a global consortium on bryophytes, we would be glad to hear about it. Ed's garden is leading on Nothofagus. But we've also got a consortia on dipterocarps, which those of you involved with the Southeast Asia Botanic Garden Network will know about, being led by Shishan Banar Botanical Garden. Various other genera and groups. Erica is just starting. So I think there's no reason why for challenging groups, we can't set up a consortium of global botanic gardens to work together in a coordinated way to really improve our performance when it comes to these particular plants.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Paul. We have 4 participants raise hand. But due to time constraint, I'd like to invite just one more participant to raise hand.
Dr. Dian, if you give permission to Ed Aikin to answer how to manage the living collections, if that possible, maybe. Thank you, Dr. Dian.
Yeah, Mr. Ed Aikin, could you please answer shortly?
Yes, so I'll do it very briefly. So just to pick up on what Paul was saying, we have a very unusual microclimate at Wakehurst. We have sandstone cliffs that are permanently humid and can sustain a really extraordinary community of sort of early vascular plants. But climate change has become a serious threat to things. So we have a plant, Hymenophyllum tumbragense, a filmy fern, which is only 1 cell thick, permanently dependent on humidity, even in the height of summer. But our extended sort of drought periods and periods of over 35 degrees Celsius day after day after day is really impacting on those plant communities. And, you know, they have very sort of low key reproduction strategies. You know, their ability to regenerate even in favorable conditions is very modest. So, you know, we have challenges. It's about maintaining a canopy above that's really focused on a very kind of dappled shade to sort of just try and kind of optimize the microclimate as much as possible. But as was hinted, we are also looking at sort of conservation methods like sort of cryogenic storage, just as a way to ensure that, I guess, ensure a fundamental sort of piece of sort of biodiversity is banked. So, you know, we have a conservation resource in place to allow us to reintroduce if possible, but it's not easy. You know, these are situations where it's hard to intervene, you know, short of manipulating the environment. You know, irrigation is not an option, for example. So it's a real life challenge for us because we know our early vascular plants and our lichens are really significant parts of our biodiversity and are very kind of valuable as research resources as well.
Thanks, Mr. Ed Icon. Sorry, participants, the time is up now, so you may email directly the speakers. Yes, I think you're all happy, right, to receive the emails? Thanks, great. Let me sum up from the discussion as well as the presentation. We start with how global botanic gardens registered under Botanic Gardens Conservation International or BGCI deal with the man-made and natural disasters that bring us able to deal with pandemic era. Then we have already shared experiences and a lot of lessons we gain from examples of botanic gardens from Asia, which are Singapore Botanic Gardens and Eka Karya Bali Botanic Gardens. Not only similarities we learned today, but also some interesting contrasts that are presented by Mr. Ed Icon from Royal Botanic Gardens at Beckhurst Place. We also shared the similar problem, of course, how to deal with financial support to save our plant collection. They are all very important. And also we can get some ways how to deal some problems and also adopt from the lesson we get from the other botanic gardens. Sure, we need to collaborate. Ladies and gentlemen, that's all for our first day webinar. I'd like to express my gratitude to our wonderful speakers, Dr. Paul, Dr. Teres Chu, thank you, Mr. Ed Icon, and also Dr. Didi, thank you, you are all so great. I'd also like to thank all the participants for your active participation. We did have a fruitful discussion and also productive webinar. Thanks a lot. Now, let me hand it over back to Mrs. Eka.
Thank you, Dr. Dian Latifah. Dear distinguished speakers, as a token of our appreciation, we would like to award each one of you with a certificate and a book entitled 3,500 Plant Species of the Botanic Gardens of Indonesia. Therefore, I would like to invite the Head of Research Center for Plant Conservation and Botanic Gardens, Dr. Hendrian, to award the certificate and the book to Dr. Paul Smith, Dr. Therese Chu, Ed Icon, Master of Art, Master of Horticulture, and Dr. Didit Oktapribadi. Bapak Dr. Hendrian, the platform is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Eka. Between Botanic Garden and BGCI, there is a long and very good collaboration. So it's my pleasure to have you here, Paul. Thank you so much for your contribution, very big contribution to the seminar. To Dr. Paul Smith.
Thank you. It's greatly appreciated, Dr. Hendrian, and I look forward to visiting. We've talked about it for many years. It's become impossible in the COVID situation, but as soon as that is over, I would love to visit Bogor Botanical Garden. My wife has been, but I have never been to your garden. So that is my ambition. Thank you.
And secondly, Therese, hope to see you in Singapore or Bogor someday. And please pass my warmest regard to colleagues and friends in Singapore Botanic Garden. This is for you, Dr. Therese Chu. Thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting contribution.
Okay, thank you.
And then Ed, thank you very much for a very interesting presentation you delivered today to us. Thank you very much, and please pass my warmest regard to all colleagues in Royal Botanic Gardens Kew, to our friends at Icon.
Thank you. It's been an honor to speak to you today and fascinating to see how many issues and opportunities we all share as a global botanic garden community. Thank you.
And the last but not least, Pak Didit. It is very good to touch them from optimistic point of view. I think you're the only presenter that touches from a very optimistic way. Matur kesuwun Pak Didit, terima kasih banyak ya. Salam buat teman-teman di Bali. Pak Dr. Didit Okta Pribadi. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Adrian. Similar to Dr. Paul, yeah, I couldn't wait to visit the Bogor Botanical Garden.
And as mentioned by Mbak Eka, we have a book titled 3,500 Plant Species of the Botanic Gardens of Indonesia. We will deliver this book for each of you. Hope to arrive in your place soon. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you.
Thanks all.
Thank you, Bapak Dr. Hendria. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. So we are now reaching the end of the first day in this webinar series. I would like to thank you to all our prominent speakers for the great presentations. I would also like to thank to all participants attending in today's webinar. Would like to apologize for any inconvenience during today's webinar. And we hope you enjoyed our webinar. And please do join us tomorrow at the second day of this webinar series at 2:30 p.m. Western Indonesia time. Please stay safe and healthy. Thank you again. See you tomorrow. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
See you tomorrow. See you tomorrow.
Yeah. Nice to see you, Dr. Paul, Edkin, Dr. Chow.
From here in Scotland. I'm Simon Milne, the Director of the Royal Botanic Garden, Edinburgh, and our gardens share a long and productive history, and I look forward to us continuing to work together